Some of your homework asks you to find cumulative relative frequencies. So we're going to look at how to find a cumulative relative frequency table. So relative frequency we talked about before, but let's go over it real quick just to help us recall. Recall what we do to get relative frequencies, and I'm going to use this table that we made before. We made a frequency table with a lower class limit and an upper class limit for these 20 scores on a math test. So let's use that frequency table to find the relative frequency table. So recall to do that, we look at how many objects we had. In this case, we had 20 scores. We can add up all the frequencies to gain that number, or of course, since the data's up here, we can count that we had 20 scores. So the relative frequency for the items between the 40 and 50 score, there were 2 of them out of 20, which if we put that into the calculator gives 0.10. All right, now the cumulative relative frequency, we're just going to add these frequencies, these relative frequencies as we go. So this is still 0.10 right now. All right, so in the next row, we'll have 1 out of 20 since we have a frequency of 1. And this is 0.05 if we put it into our calculator. We add together the 0.10 and the 0.05 for the next line of the cumulative relative frequency. So that's going to be 0.15 when we add these two together. All right, well, let's go to the next row. We had 5 out of 20 here. So 5 out of 20 is going to be 0.25 for its relative frequency. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's right, 0.25. And if we add 0.25 to the 0.15 we had in the previous row, this is 0.40. All right, so let's keep going. We now have 4 out of 20, which if we put that into the calculator is 0.20. Add that 0.20 to the 0.40 we previously had, our cumulative relative frequency is 0.60. And then our next row, we have 7 for our frequency out of 20, which is going to give us a 0.35 when we stick that into the calculator. Add 0.35 to 0.60, and we have 0.95 for our cumulative relative frequency. And then lastly, in our last row, our frequency is 1, so we'll have 1 out of 20, which if you put that into the calculator is 0.05, and add 0.05 to 0.95, and we get 1. And with cumulative relative frequency, the last row should always give us 1, because we're adding up all the frequencies, which always add up to 1. So there's cumulative relative frequency. The other thing we're going to see in this homework is the shape of histograms. Now, we did a histogram in the last video, but sometimes when we do histograms, they'll have specific shapes. So let's notice this histogram here, where the boxes or the bars are getting smaller and smaller and just sort of declining as we go out to the right. This is called a right skewed histogram. Notice it's just sort of declining as it goes out to the right. Now notice this one does exactly the opposite. The boxes are getting smaller and smaller and going out to the left. So this is called, of course, left skewed. You see this decline going out to the left. If we could sort of draw a line going down the middle of the histogram, and it's roughly a mirror image on both sides of that line, as this one is. It doesn't have to be an exact mirror image, just close to being a mirror image. We call the graph symmetric. All right, so, and this particular graph, we'll be studying more of this later on. A symmetric graph is called bell-shaped because if we tried to draw a curve going over the top of this graph, it would resemble a bell. When we see that the bars of our histogram are almost all the same, we call it uniform. So notice that these bars are very similar in height. We call this a uniform distribution. And then finally, we will often have histograms where there are more than one peak. In this case, there are two peaks. We would call that bimodal. Most histograms are unimodal. They have one peak. And if we have many peaks, we'll call it multimodal. This one has two peaks that are higher than all of the rest of the bars around it.